My name is Kieran. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, in 2015. My college experience was perfect. I was part of a frat, I managed my studies well, and spent just the right amount of time chasing girls. I'm actually still friends with a lot of my old frat brothers, and I recently got engaged to my fiancée Kaylee, whom I also met at Berkeley. If you had asked me my opinion of Berkeley when I was a freshman, though, I can assure you that my answer would be very, very different. What I'm about to tell you was one of the main reasons why I was never overly ambitious in high school. The Berkeley atmosphere was extremely foreign to me, and it was weird being surrounded by so many self-proclaimed high achievers. As a freshman, I was quickly swept up into the frenzy of career development and planning the next 30 years of your life as an 18-year-old. Silly, I know, but that was the nature of my school at the time. If you wanted to get any sort of offer in the business world, having a strong LinkedIn profile was a necessity. I can still remember the stress of cultivating a professional image online, as if my future hinged on which people I connected with and what skills I listed. Regardless, I checked all the boxes and began my search for a summer internship. It wasn't long before my inbox chimed with an actual meaningful message. To my genuine surprise, a prestigious business firm had reached out to me, expressing interest in my profile. It wasn't one of those bot messages either. The substance of the message indicated that this was actually a unique message designed specifically for me. I read it over like 6 times before finally responding, and after about a day of brief correspondence, I was invited to a first-round interview. I spent hours researching the company so I'd know what to expect come the interview and prepped myself with all the sample questions I could find. I soon got a message from a guy named Leonard Slawinski. I'll never forget that name for as long as I live. He stated that he was to be my interviewer. And naturally, the first thing I did was do some background research on the guy. However, excitement soon gave way to puzzlement. I scoured LinkedIn for Leonard's profile, expecting to glean some insight into the person I'd soon be meeting. Strangely, I found nothing, no trace of their professional footprint, no social media. Nothing. I shrugged it off, attributing it to perhaps a preference for privacy or something like that. Leonard and I agreed on a day and time, and he gave me the interview location. I searched it up on my phone and realized that it was some random coffee shop in Oakland. This is when I started getting confused. Why would an interview not take place in Berkeley? We had tons of coffee shops and perfect places for interviews in our college town, so I was just perplexed. The address online seemed pretty normal, though, so I didn't think much of it. A day before the interview, I told my friend Marcus about the situation. He was even more confused than I was, telling me that the situation seemed fishy. I agreed with him, but I figured it was worth it for the position I might be getting. He asked me how I was getting there, and I told him I was Ubering. He offered to give me a ride as he wasn't doing anything at the time. I thanked him and took him up on his offer. Little did I know, I might not even be telling the story if he hadn't offered to drive me. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, and Marcus rolled up to my dorm. Admittedly, I was extremely nervous, and this was one of my first interviews. I got in the car, and we were off. 30 minutes later, I told Marcus to drop me off on the street as I didn't want to be seen having a friend drop me off for an interview. I thanked him, and he offered to wait for me. I asked him if he was sure, and he smirked, pulling out a big bag of weed from inside of his dashboard. I left then, shut the door, and walked a couple of minutes to the location. Frozen in my tracks, I looked up at the literal construction site in front of me. There was no coffee shop. Even stranger, this entire area wasn't residential at all. All the buildings looked closed or private. Confused, I double-checked my phone and confirmed that I was in the right location. This entire block must have been recently demolished, so recently that even Google Maps hadn't updated. I pulled out my phone to call Marcus, but before I could, a booming voice rang out behind me. "Kieran!" exclaimed a deep voice. I whipped around and was met with the appearance of an absurdly tall man wearing an expensive-looking black suit. Thank God, I thought, grateful that this whole ordeal hadn't been some kind of setup. His presence was commanding yet oddly out of place amidst the derelict surroundings. I should also note that the car he was standing next to was a matte black Bentley. He walked toward me with a confused look on his face. We shook hands, and when I asked him about the construction site, he said he was just as surprised as I was. He furrowed his eyebrows and put his hand on his chin. "You know what, why don't we find someplace else?" "Get in," he said, motioning towards the Bentley. He walked back to the car and shouted over his shoulder, "Shotgun's all yours." Without another word, he got in the front seat and shut the door. Excitedly, I followed. I walked around the car just to admire it a little and couldn't help but glance into the back seat. I expected to see the beautiful leather seats that you would expect in a Bentley, but instead, my eyes met a sight that sent a chill down my spine. Lying flat on the ground, obscured by the shadows, was a man. In his hand, he held something long and metal. Panic surged within me, my mind racing with the implications of what lay before me. This was a trap. I turned away from the car and ran as fast as I had ever run before. I heard the man yell my name from behind me, but I didn't even turn around to look. As I ran, I heard the one sound I was dreading, screeching tires. I shot a glance over my shoulder and saw the car turning around, pointing in my direction. I had to think quickly. There was no way I was going to outrun a car. It wasn't like I could just escape the situation. There wasn't really any open space around me, just an endless maze of streets. I could feel the terror coursing through my veins. I made it to the next intersection and faced a choice that may have decided my fate, left or right. Logic told me to just turn left as it was closer, but my feet chose for me before my brain could. I sprinted across the street to the right and darted down the road. I knew I didn't have long, 10, maybe 20 seconds at most. As if by some miracle, one of the buildings in front of me had a fire escape that looked just low enough to jump onto. With every ounce of strength I had, I vaulted myself upwards, grabbing onto the ladder. I had never done a pull-up in my life, but in my mind, this was life or death. I made it up the ladder and kept climbing. The Bentley whipped around the corner and stopped on the street in front of the building. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew he was looking at me. There was nothing else I could do. If they chose to follow me, I'd just have to fight. The next minute felt like an eternity. The car stood there a little while longer and then accelerated down the street, turning left to never be seen again. I couldn't breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus, basically screaming into the phone about what happened. I stayed on the fire escape until he found me. I got in the car, and we sped off in silence. The aftermath of this whole thing was pretty uneventful. I sort of blocked it out of my brain and refused to talk about it, even with Marcus. As far as I was concerned, it never happened. But as much as I tried, there are times, like right now, when I can't help but recall every horrifying detail of what could have been the last day of my life. It was my first year of university. I had just finished unpacking all of my stuff into my room, and my family had just left. Later on that same day, my roommate finally arrived, and right from the get-go, I knew this kid was the most socially inept person I'd ever met. I introduced myself as Curtis, sticking out my arm for a handshake. He paused, looked down at my arm as if he didn't understand it at first, then laughed and went, "Oh," and gave me an almost dead fish handshake. I had to ask him for his name since he didn't even tell me when we shook hands. He was Riley. I tried to make small talk, but he just answered my questions with yes or no's, occasionally awkwardly laughing or smiling. Within minutes, we were both just sitting on our beds on our laptops, not talking to each other. I was upset and planned on requesting to be placed with a different roommate. Anyone would be better than Riley, I thought. Riley was just a really awkward kid, but I soon learned he was much more than just that. I met some of the other kids on my floor, and they seemed cool, so that was good. I came back to my dorm after looking around campus the first night to find Riley still in the same position he was in when I left. I said, "What's up, Riley?" and he didn't answer, not to my surprise. It was 9:30. I didn't have anything to do, so I turned out the lamp on my side of the room and went to bed. I didn't actually fall asleep anytime soon, though. Riley was on his laptop until 3 in the morning. When he finally closed his laptop, I fell asleep pretty quickly but woke up within the hour. The blinds to our room had been opened, and the moonlight now creeping into the room made everything visible, including Riley sitting on the side of his bed, looking at me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and said, "Riley, what the hell are you doing?" He whispered back, "Sorry," and laid down. The next morning, I woke up to find Riley had already gotten up. I felt like it was the first time he'd left the room. It was a Saturday. The first Saturday of the year, meaning orientation and all the campus festivities. During the orientation, as my group was walking by the school gardens, I heard a couple of students ahead of me saying, "What is that kid doing in there?" I saw who they were talking about. It was Riley, literally sitting in the dirt behind a patch of bushes, rubbing the bark of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, otherwise, I'm sure she would have said something. I just walked by, not saying anything, eventually telling the two kids I overheard that he was my roommate as a way to start a conversation and maybe make some friends. They apologized for me. None of us really knew if it was appropriate to laugh or not, but we did. I made friends with those two kids, and we made plans to get together that night. I also learned when I got back to my dorm that the school found another roommate for me. Things seemed to be turning around quickly for the better. I left the room that night to go meet up with the two kids I met. And when I got back, Riley was sitting on the desk chair facing the door. I said, "Oh hey, what's up?" He said, "Nothing," very matter-of-factly. I sat down on my bed and opened my laptop and realized I forgot to lock it. I also realized that all of my emails had been opened, emails I was pretty sure I didn't even read, and a bunch of folders of mine had been opened. They all must have snooped through my laptop when I was out. When I asked him if he did, he responded, "No," very loudly, half a second after I even finished my question. I could read him like a book. This creepy kid was literally going through my computer when I was out. I knew he did it, but I didn't pursue it. I was ready to go to bed, so as I went into my bed to look for my pajamas, I felt like my clothing had all been moved around as well. I knew I'd be out of there forever by tomorrow, so I didn't say anything. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a zipper. I sat up and saw Riley on the ground going through my bag. I turned the lamp on this time, confronting him about it. He played dumb, saying, "I think you have my toothbrush by mistake." It was the closest thing to wits that he'd shown up until that point. Still, I knew he was lying and I knew something was wrong with him. I couldn't get physical with him. The next day, I met my new roommate in the same building and everything went well. Sunday night, after having a decent conversation with my roommate, who was no social butterfly but was miles better than Riley, we both turned off our lights and went to bed. For the third night in a row, I woke up at some odd hour of the night to a strange noise. It was a weird clicking noise. It wasn't consistent, but I'd hear it at least twice every 30 seconds. I got up, hoping to find something innocent like a heavy bag putting pressure on a weak floorboard or even a mouse. But as I scoped out the room, I realized the sound was actually coming from the other side of the door. The night light in the common area was always on. So when I looked through the peephole, I was able to see the scalp of the person standing on the other side of our door. They were looking down, so I couldn't see their face, but now that I was paying attention, I realized the tiny clicking noises were actually coming from the doorknob. I was sure the person was trying to unlock the door. I dialed the number for the campus police department, and they showed up in under 5 minutes to the common room. Only then did I feel it was safe to open the door. I found the officers to have Riley in cuffs. I had a feeling it was him. I told them everything, that he was my former roommate who was going through my stuff, so I switched dorms, only to find him trying to break into my new dorm. They took him away. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I never saw him again. He either got suspended for the semester or expelled. I got through the rest of my years at university like anybody else. However, the nightmarish experience I had with Riley still pops up in my head every now and then. I'm not going to lie, I basically went to college to smoke weed and go to parties. My full intention was to do just enough to get by while partying as much as I could. Unfortunately, though, for me, I only applied to a few schools and was only accepted to one, a small college in the mountains of New Hampshire. It was very small, around 3,500 total undergrads, and I went not knowing anybody. On the first day, as I was skipping the ice-breaking games and other students were giving tours of the campus to their families before leaving, I wandered down a small path behind the cafeteria toward a small stream that I had noticed during the drive-in. I lit a joint, and I was just meandering around when I noticed another dude a little further down the stream that cut a straightish path through the trees. He was also smoking a joint, I assumed, at least by the way he was holding it. So I made my way over to see if I just made my first college friend and introduce myself. His name was Louis, and he seemed pretty cool. He was smoking some really nice herbs, so I figured I could get along with him. He only stood at about 5 feet 5 inches and he was also a little stubby, but I remember noticing that he had a really weird laugh, like a nervous type. Whenever he laughed, he'd kind of look off to the side and then glance back at me from his peripheral vision. Yeah, I knew it was kind of weird back then for being the first time I'd met him, literally the first 30 seconds of introducing myself. But I just thought maybe he was socially awkward, had bad teeth, or who knows. I was taught not to judge, and he was otherwise normal. We ended up hanging out fairly frequently, playing video games, drinking, and smoking. But other people, especially in my dorm, didn't really seem to take to him, not that I really felt a strong connection with him. I didn't. It was a very superficial friendship built around drugs and debauchery, but I definitely got the sense that my other friends weren't comfortable around him. Then something weird happened that I've managed to successfully forget about until just very recently. My heart is pumping out of my chest just typing this. One weekend, my roommate was home for a visit, and Louis's roommate was having his girlfriend over, which basically implied in college terms that Louis was staying with me. It kind of just seemed automatic. We got trashed, smoked a ton, got pizza, and played video games. I was pretty out of it, and we were both sitting in desk chairs in my room, passing a bowl back and forth. When he handed the bowl to me, leaning toward me in his chair, he put his hand over my hand and casually in a low, steady voice said, "I'm going to kill you." Okay, so like I said, we were all sorts of up, but I was definitely freaked out a little. He'd never really been aggressive before, even at his most intoxicated, and he certainly never said anything like this before. I've never handled confrontation very well, so all I said was, "Dude, don't do that, bro," and I sort of just laughed it off. I tried to write it off as a drunk, stoned idiot playing too much Mortal Kombat. We had a bunk bed set up in the room since it was pretty small, and I was on the top. My roommate was a bigger guy and didn't want to have to climb down to pee in the middle of the night. We had both gone to bed, but my roommate had put up Christmas lights that we always kept on, strung along the ceiling. I'm half deaf, I should add, and when I sleep, I tend to roll onto my functioning ear to block out sounds or maybe muffle them in the pillow. This also means that I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. But sometime during the night, I woke up feeling a little nauseous and slowly opened my eyes. Louis was standing on the edge of the mattress, holding on to the side railings of my top bunk and staring directly at my face as I was sleeping. My eyes grew wide as I snapped awake and sat up. "What the hell, dude?" I said, backing up and bumping my head on the wall behind me. Then he turned his head and gave me that look from the corners of his eyes, the same smile and laugh that freaked me out the first day I met him. He was still holding the railings, standing on the mattress from the lower bunk, with his face lit in weird splashes of color from the Christmas lights. He took one hand from the railing, put his finger to his mouth while smiling and still looking at me sideways, and whispered, "Shoo," before hopping down and leaving the room. It was like 3 a.m., and I don't know where he went that night. I never told anyone about that, and I pretty much did my best to bury it and never think about it again. I avoided Louis for the rest of the year, making up excuses when he wanted to chill alone, but I did end up at the same parties with him a few times. We never talked about it, though. He never brought it up. I transferred to another school the following year, not because of Louis or anything, just financial reasons. I did manage to forget about that weird incident, but that was 15 years ago. I'm 33 now and recently got a call from my old roommate from the school in New Hampshire, who luckily remembered my very repetitive phone number. I actually made a song out of it that's really easy to remember, and I've never changed the number. "Man, remember that guy Louis that you used to hang out with at the dorms? He killed his 2 friends with a hunting knife and fishing line on a camping trip a year ago," he said. He said he was too screwed up to control himself, supposedly, and he was mixing his meds with booze and drugs. They said he just lost it. The thing that messes with me is wondering if he told them he was going to kill them like he did me, and that the last thing they saw was that sideways smile that I saw when I woke up that night. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.